It all started, as many ill-advised adventures do, with a text. My phone buzzed with a message from my best friend, Karen, and while I should have been suspicious when her opening line was, "Are you ready for something unforgettable?" I let my curiosity get the better of me. Karen and I had been to a few swinger parties before. Don't judge me, it's not like we were swinging from the chandeliers or anything. Usually, we went out of curiosity, armed with enough wine to float a small boat and a pack to laugh off any weirdness. Some parties were wild, some were tame, and some were so awkwardly middle-aged suburban that you felt like you'd accidentally walked into a PTA meeting. But Karen swore this one was different. "I've got the address for the swing party of the year," she texted. "According to reviews, they throw the best ones in town." I wasn't sure where she found these reviews. Yelp, Google, some secret swingers subreddit. But I was intrigued. I texted her back. "Tell me everything." What followed was a detailed breakdown of how this particular party had a reputation for its selective guest list and unparalleled atmosphere. The part that got me. Karen assured me that only the most attractive and fun people would be there. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not shallow. But if I'm going to spend my Saturday night in a stranger's living room with an amorphous vibe of no-pressure mingling, I'd at least like the crowd to be easy on the eyes. Gave in. "All right, I'm in," I wrote, sealing my fate. The party was set for 8 p.m. the following evening, and the closer the time came, the more my excitement mingled with nerves. What was I doing? Who was I kidding with this? I was no stranger to these parties, but still, every time I agreed to one, there was this moment of why am I like this? But Karen was my accomplice in chaos, and I knew she'd keep me grounded, or at least ply me with enough Prosecco to forget my anxiety. When I arrived at her apartment that evening, Karen was already dressed in a stunning red jumpsuit that screamed confidence. "Oh, honey," she said, eyeing my outfit. A little black dress that I hoped said charming and approachable, rather than wildly out of place. "It's perfect," Karen declared, handing me a glass of wine as I walked through the door. By the time we arrived at the house, a surprisingly understated yet sprawling suburban mansion, the air buzzed with anticipation. We were greeted warmly by the host, who handed us glasses of champagne and ushered us inside. Everything looked normal. Tastefully dim lighting, jazz softly playing in the background, and a small gathering of people chatting easily. It felt more like a high-end networking event than the risque escapade I'd imagined. But then, as Karen and I mingled near the bar, the door opened, and in walked a group of 6 men. Not just any men, these guys were striking. Like, jaw-droppingly good-looking, with an aura of confidence that immediately filled the room. And yes, they were all black. I glanced at Karen, whose expression mirrored mine. A mix of intrigue, surprise, and mild panic. She leaned over and whispered, "Did not see that coming, did you?" "No," I whispered back, trying to sound composed. The men quickly became the center of attention, their presence commanding the room in a way that was magnetic but not overpowering. Karen and I exchanged glances as if to say, "Well, this night just got interesting." The rest of the evening started as a blur of introductions and easy conversation. Each man was charming in his own way, polite, funny, and undeniably charismatic. There was a sense of effortlessness to their interactions, as if they were used to this kind of attention, but still completely genuine in their interest. And then, just as I was starting to feel comfortable, Karen nudged me and grinned mischievously. "Looks like you've got someone's attention," she whispered. I followed her gaze to see one of the men, tall, impeccably dressed, with a smile that could melt glaciers, watching me from across the room. He raised his glass in a small toast, and I felt my cheeks heat up in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. As the night unfolded, the energy in the room became a mix of light-hearted laughter, curiosity, and that unmistakable charge of possibility. Karen, as always, was in her element, chatting up one of the men as if she'd known him for years. I was doing my best to blend in, sipping champagne and trying to look cool instead of completely overwhelmed by the magnetic energy of the group. "Remember the tall man who toasted me earlier? Let's call him Adrien." He'd casually drifted over at some point. his presence so smooth I didn't even notice until he was standing beside me. "So," he began, his voice deep and warm, "is this your first time at one of these?" His question caught me off guard. "Oh no," I said, trying to sound casual. "I mean, not exactly. I've been to a couple of parties before." I waved my hand vaguely, as if I were a seasoned veteran of whatever this was. "What about you?" Adrien smiled, leaning a little closer. "You could say I'm a regular. But this party's unique." I tilted my head, intrigued. "What makes it unique?" He didn't answer right away, taking a slow sip of his drink before flashing me that million-watt smile again. "Let's just say there's always something new to discover." Meanwhile, Karen had clearly found her groove. She was laughing, tossing her hair over her shoulder, completely in her element. I envied her ease. While she seemed to embrace the adventure head-on, I was still tiptoeing around the edges, trying to decide if I was ready to dive in. Adrien must have noticed my hesitation because he gestured toward the nearby seating area. "Want to sit for a bit? It's a little quieter over there." I hesitated. Was this a good idea? But then again, I didn't come here to hover by the bar all night. "Sure," I said, surprising myself. We settled into a plush love seat tucked into a corner of the room, the murmur of conversations and clinking glasses fading into the background. Adrien was easy to talk to, with that rare gift of making you feel like the most fascinating person in the room. We chatted about everything and nothing. Our jobs, our favorite movies, even a hilarious anecdote about a disastrous vacation he'd taken. Somewhere in the middle of our conversation, I realized I was actually enjoying myself. For the first time that night, I wasn't overthinking every little thing. Instead, I found myself laughing, leaning into the moment. "Okay, your turn," Adrien said, flashing me that smile again. "What made you come tonight?" That was a tricky question. I couldn't exactly say. My best friend dragged me here, and I didn't want to look like a coward. So I went with the truth, well, mostly. "I guess I was curious," I admitted. "I mean, it's not every day you get invited to something like this." Adrien chuckled. "Fair enough. Curiosity is a good reason." Across the room, Karen was now sitting with two of the other men, her laughter echoing above the din of the party. She caught my eye and gave me a cheeky thumbs up, as if to say, "See? Isn't this fun?" I shook my head, smiling despite myself. Karen had a knack for pushing me out of my comfort zone, and while I hated to admit it, she was usually right. The evening began to take on a rhythm, conversations flowing naturally, a few playful glances exchanged across the room. But there was something else too. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the air. The kind of shift that makes you aware of every detail. The warmth of the room, the soft glow of the candles, the way Adrien's knee brushed mine as we sat close. Karen appeared at my side suddenly, her face flushed from laughter. "Having fun?" she asked, winking at Adrien as if they were old friends. "I'm working on it," I said, giving her a mock glare. Karen leaned in, lowering her voice. "Just let go, okay? Trust me, you'll thank me later." And with that, she was gone again, leaving me alone with Adrien, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "She's quite the whirlwind," he said, his tone amused. "You have no idea," I muttered, though I couldn't help but smile. Adrien tilted his head, studying me for a moment. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "you don't have to overthink it. Just enjoy the moment." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, someone called Adrien's name from across the room. He stood, giving me an apologetic smile. "Duty calls," he said. "But I'll see you around." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me to process everything that had just happened. I found Karen again a little later, her cheeks glowing and her energy as infectious as ever. "Well," she asked, raising an eyebrow. "What do you think?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "It's not what I expected, but I think I might like it." Karen grinned, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "Told you. Unforgettable, right?" The champagne was beginning to work its magic, softening the sharp edges of my nerves. The buzz of the party seemed a little less intimidating, and for the first time, I found myself relaxing into the atmosphere. Karen, of course, was already thriving. I spotted her across the room, animatedly talking with two of the men, her laughter ringing out like a bell. I envied her ability to dive headfirst into these situations without a second thought. Meanwhile, I was still standing awkwardly near the love seat Adrien and I had shared, trying to decide if I wanted another drink or if I should just casually fade into the wallpaper. "Are you always this quiet?" A deep voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see another man from the group of 6. Let's call him Marcus. He was just as striking as Adrien, but in a completely different way. Where Adrien had been warm and charming, Marcus carried himself with a quiet intensity that made my pulse quicken. He held out a glass of champagne, a teasing smile playing on his lips. "Or are you just building up to something?" Caught off guard, I took the glass, trying not to show how flustered I was. "Just taking it all in," I replied, hoping it sounded casual and not like the truth. "I have no idea what I'm doing." Marcus leaned against the wall, studying me with an easy confidence that made me feel like I was under a spotlight. "It's your first time at a party like this, isn't it?" he asked. "Why does everyone keep asking me that?" I blurted out before I could stop myself. Marcus laughed, a low, rumbling sound that somehow made me feel both self-conscious and charmed. "It's not a bad thing," he said. "There's a certain energy about first-timers. Curious, cautious. It's refreshing." I wasn't sure how to respond to that, so I took a sip of champagne, hoping the bubbles would give me something clever to say. Spoiler, they didn't. Karen reappeared at my side like the whirlwind she was, dragging me into a corner for a quick debrief. "So," she asked, her eyes sparkling with mischief, "what do you think of Marcus?" I rolled my eyes. "Why are you always trying to play matchmaker?" Karen shrugged, her grin unapologetic. "Because I know you and I know when you're overthinking everything. Just go with the flow for once. Trust me." Before I could respond, Marcus appeared behind her, his tall frame making her look almost petite by comparison. "Am I interrupting?" he asked, his smile suggesting he knew exactly what we were talking about. Karen winked at me before making her dramatic exit, leaving me alone with Marcus once again. The next few hours passed in a blur of conversation, laughter, and stolen glances. I found myself drawn to Marcus's quiet intensity, the way he seemed to listen so intently, as if every word I said mattered. It was different, and I liked it. As the evening wore on, the party began to shift. Conversations became quieter, laughter softer, the energy in the room more charged. Karen had settled into a small group near the fireplace, her body language relaxed and open, clearly enjoying herself. I stayed by the bar, unsure of what to do next. The idea of jumping into the fray felt both thrilling and terrifying, and I wasn't entirely sure which feeling would win out. Marcus returned, his presence grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. "Still taking it all in?" he asked, his tone teasing but kind. "Something like that," I admitted, my voice quieter than I intended. He tilted his head, studying me for a moment. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he said, his voice gentle. "But if you want to step out of your comfort zone just a little, I'd be happy to show you around." The offer hung in the air between us, tantalizing and terrifying all at once. Part of me wanted to say no, to retreat to the safety of Karen's orbit and spend the rest of the night as a quiet observer. But another part, a braver, bolder part, wanted to take Marcus up on his offer. "Okay," I said finally, surprising myself as much as him. "Show me." Marcus led me to a quieter corner of the room, where a small group was gathered. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, the conversation easy and playful. It wasn't nearly as intimidating as I'd imagined, and I found myself relaxing into the moment. Karen caught my eye from across the room, her expression one of barely contained excitement. She gave me a discreet thumbs up, and I couldn't help but laugh. For the first time that night I felt like I belonged. The night felt like it had its own pulse, slow and steady, but with every passing moment, the beat grew louder. Karen was now fully in her element, her laughter mingling with the smooth rhythm of the music. She shot me a wink from across the room, clearly thriving, while I was still navigating the fine line between exhilaration and utter chaos. Marcus had been a grounding force, and yet, something about him kept me on edge in the best way. His calm, confident demeanor made it impossible not to feel like I was exactly where I was meant to be, even if my heart raced like it was auditioning for a marathon. "So, how's the tour so far?" Marcus asked, his voice low and laced with amusement. I smirked, sipping my champagne to buy myself a moment. "It was different, but in a good way." Marcus chuckled. "That's a diplomatic answer if I've ever heard one." He wasn't wrong. I was still figuring out how I felt about the whole experience. But what surprised me most wasn't the atmosphere or even the boldness of the attendees. It was me. I hadn't run away, hadn't let my nerves get the better of me. Instead, I stayed. The party had shifted into something more intimate now. The earlier hum of light-hearted conversation had softened, replaced by a deeper kind of connection between the guests. Small groups formed naturally, and though nothing overtly suggestive was happening, the energy in the room was undeniable. I found myself seated on a low velvet couch, Marcus beside me. Karen was nearby, leaning comfortably against the armrest of another man, her face glowing with that carefree ease I'd always admired. "Do you ever just people watch at these things?" I asked Marcus, hoping to steer the conversation somewhere light. "All the time," he replied, a knowing smile on his lips. "You'd be surprised how much you can learn by observing." "Oh," I raised an eyebrow. "And what have you learned tonight?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied me, his gaze warm but intense enough to make my cheeks flush. "I've learned that some people come here to let go, some come to escape, and some come to find something they didn't even know they were looking for." His words hung in the air between us, weighted with meaning I wasn't sure I was ready to unpack. "What about you?" I asked, my voice softer now. "Why do you come?" Marcus leaned back slightly, his expression contemplative. "For me, it's about connection. Genuine connection. Everything else is just extra." It was a surprisingly vulnerable answer, and it caught me off guard. I'd expected something flippant or vague, but instead he gave me honesty. The minutes stretched into hours, and though the room's energy continued to hum with quiet intensity, I felt lighter. The conversations, the subtle glances, the unspoken understanding between everyone in the room. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. And then Karen, ever the catalyst for chaos, made her move. "Dance with me," she declared, pulling me to my feet before I could protest. "Karen," I hissed, glancing nervously around the room. "Oh, come on," she said, twirling me toward the center of the room. "You've been sitting there all night. Let loose." The music, now a sultry beat, seemed to fill every corner of the space, and for a moment I let myself get lost in it. Karen spun me around, her laughter infectious, and soon I was laughing too, the tension in my shoulders melting away. Marcus joined us, his movements smooth and effortless. "She's got a point," he said, his tone teasing. "You're allowed to have fun, you know." "I am having fun," I insisted, though my awkward shuffle suggested otherwise. Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please. Watch and learn." She took the lead, pulling me into a loose, playful rhythm that made me feel like less of a flailing penguin. Marcus stayed close, his presence grounding me even as Karen's antics threatened to send me spiraling into full-blown hysteria. By the time the song ended, I was breathless, my cheeks flushed from laughter and exertion. Karen gave me a knowing grin before retreating to her corner of the room, leaving me alone with Marcus once again. "See," he said, his voice soft as he handed me another glass of champagne. "You're good at this." "At dancing?" I asked, arching an eyebrow. "At letting go," he replied, his tone sincere. I didn't have a witty comeback for that. Instead, I clinked my glass against his and took a sip, the champagne's bubbles fizzing against my lips. As the night began to wind down, I found myself sitting on the same velvet couch, Marcus's arm resting casually along the backrest. Karen had returned, her energy slightly more subdued but still radiant. "So," she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Was I right or was I right?" I rolled my eyes, but a smile tugged at the corners of my lips. "You were right," I admitted. Karen beamed, clearly satisfied with herself. When the party finally ended and Marcus walked me to the door, I felt an odd mix of exhilaration and calm. "Thank you," I said, unsure if I meant for the champagne, the company, or the experience as a whole. Marcus smiled, his expression warm. "You're welcome. And hey, don't be a stranger." I nodded, stepping out into the cool night air with Karen by my side. As we walked to the car, Karen threw an arm around my shoulders. "So, what's the verdict? Would you do it again?" I glanced back at the house, a soft glow still emanating from the windows. "Maybe," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "But only if you're with me." Karen laughed, pulling me into a quick hug. "Deal."